Hi, my name is Buehler, and I am a graduate student at Morningside College. I teach K-6 Title I and 7th grade literature at the Central in Iowa. And the title of my research is The Effects of Phonics Instruction on First Grade Students in Title I. As I started to think about what to do for my research, I attended a professional development with my district, and one of the statistics that they gave us during that professional development was that 64 to 66% of our students are not reaching proficiency standards set by our nation. And then we looked a little more deeply and found that 62% of students in our district at the first grade level were not reaching proficiency on the Bridge assessment. So this really became a place for me to look a little deeper and figure out which interventions are best for students that are in that 62% range. As a Title I teacher, I serve many of those students, and it's important for me to identify the best intervention, especially at that early first grade level, so that I can provide them with the instruction that they need to be successful in the general education classroom. However, as I looked into which research method or which intervention method, would be most effective, there were lots of conflicting research. My literature review supports the fact that there's conflicting research here because as I looked into Orton-Gillingham and game-based learning, it became clear that each felt it was the best practice for students. Orton-Gillingham and systematic phonics instruction showed that it was best with the youngest participants, which was good because I was dealing with first graders. Other systematic phonics instruction that I read about used components of Orton-Gillingham and found improvements with letter and sound recognition and identification. On the game-based learning side of things, they talked about the positive effects that game-based learning has on motivation because of its entertainment value, but you're also able to incorporate the goals as a teacher. So my research question became, which method of instruction is most effective in helping early readers meet proficiency goals? And the purpose of my study was to provide clarification on best practice for early reading intervention concerning game-based phonics and systematic phonics instruction. And I hypothesized that the Orton-Gillingham would produce a larger increase in phonics ability than would the unstructured approach using phonics games. Thinking about the impacts that this would have on the field of study, I was hopeful that as researchers read my work, they would be inspired to do their own research. Orton-Gillingham and game-based phonics instruction are not the only phonics interventions out there. And so there are other phonics interventions that need to be compared so that we can find best practice for our teachers. For my own instruction purposes, because I had just been trained in Orton-Gillingham and I had previously been using the game-based phonics, I wanted to know which one would be best for the instruction in my classroom. I had 6 participants. They were all first grade students, ages 6 and 7. I had 4 girls and 2 boys, and they were all Title I students assigned to my Title I classroom. This recommendation for Title I services came from their kindergarten teacher as they moved into first grade the next year, and it was based on their Bridge results from the spring of their kindergarten year, and also the skills and observations the teacher had in the general education classroom. My materials for my research included the Quick Phonics Screener. This was my pre-test, post-test measure. For the game-based phonics, I used a variety of teacher-created phonics games, which worked on letter names and sound identification, rhyming, and blending letters into words. On the Orton-Gillingham's intervention, I used student chalk and chalkboards, lined paper and pencils, the Orton-Gillingham cards, which have a letter or a blend or a vowel pair on one side, and then all of the rules for using that letter, blend, or vowel pair on the back side, and the order in which students should know how to use them. I also used decodable readers for my Orton-Gillingham intervention, and these are books which only include words the student, or words or skills or letters, letter names, vowel pairs that the student has mastered, so that whenever the student encounters a word that he or she may not know, they can decode the pieces of it to figure out what the word is. So I started my procedure with a pretest, and then there were 8 weeks of intervention. My 6 participants were randomly split into 2 groups, and the first group received Orton-Gillingham for 8 weeks, and the second group received the phonics or the game-based phonics instruction for 8 weeks. And then after that 8 weeks, I gave them the post-test. Now, thinking a little bit about the Quick Phonics Screener, that is a valid and reliable measure in and of itself. However, the Quick Phonics Screener doesn't have a point system that it uses, so I assigned points for each correct response, and this took away from the validity and reliability of my testing measure. After my post-test, I used a paired samples t-test to compare my data, and I found that my hypothesis was supported, that systematic phonics instruction did produce a greater gain than unstructured game-based phonics. The Orton-Gillingham group showed a significant difference in their pretest to post-test data. The game-based phonics group did not show a significant difference in their data. However, as our instructor pointed out when he made comments after he first looked at my paper, it was very close, my game-based phonics group. And as you look at some of my data coming up here in my next slide, you'll see it was very close. So here are the data for the Orton-Gillingham group. They started with a mean of 61.33 and ended with a mean of 73.67. So we have about a 13-point increase there from pretest to post-test. And the game-based phonics instruction group started with 62.33 and ended with a 74.0. That's just under a 12-point difference. So as you can see, it was very close. And this next slide, the bar graphs look almost identical. Even though my students were randomly split in the beginning, you would think that I had sorted them out so that they would start with the same mean, but it's slightly different, as are the end results. So the Orton-Gillingham, which is that second set of bars, did have greater gain versus the game-based phonics instruction, and the Orton-Gillingham was significant, and the game-based learning was slightly not significant. So as I thought about what was learned here, because my data was so close, I really feel like teachers have to know their students. If you feel like you have a student, or if I feel like I have a student in my classroom who is struggling because he or she just isn't motivated to read, or isn't paying attention in class, maybe that game-based phonics instruction would engage them enough that they would begin to make some gains in their phonics instruction. However, if I felt like I had a student that was really trying, or if I had a student that I wasn't sure why they weren't successful, then the Orton-Gillingham would be, as the data has shown, the best practice, the best choice. So my limitations were my sample size. I only had 3 students in my Orton-Gillingham group and 3 students in my game-based phonics group. and of course my validity and reliability of my testing measure when I added that point system to the phonics screener. So looking forward, I think that teachers and myself would be interested to see how a study would play out with an entire classroom or even a couple of classrooms of students. I still think that the groups should be 3 to 4 students because that smaller group is going to produce better results for each of the students involved. But if we had a class of 20 or 30 students and we split them into groups of 3 or 4, and half of the groups receive the Orton Gillingham and half of the groups receive the phonics game-based instruction, then I think that that would give us a better idea of which measure is more often statistically significant and best practice for our students. And additionally, there needs to be a way of collecting data for that purpose using a pretest and post-test that allows the researcher to collect data. Here are my references for my presentation. I hope that you enjoyed, and thank you for watching.